Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here. I just want to start with a word of prayer. Kind Father in heaven, we thank you for this gathering and for these souls that you have placed here. We ask that our hearts would be receptive and that the words that are spoken would be yours and not mine. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, thank you all for being here. And, you know, in ancient Israel, the Lord, despite them wandering away from the truth from time to time, provided many wonderful leaders for them. And he hasn't forgotten us in these days, and he gives us people like Tony Perkins. And I think that is a wonderful thing. But you know, when our country was founded, there was a lot of controversy. A lot of people didn't think that it would work. A lot of the Europeans were saying, you can't run a country on the will of the people. You have to have a king. You have to have a monarch. But they fought away, and our founders studied every system that ever existed. And one of the things that they found was that all governments, no matter how they start, no matter how lofty their ideals are, they do the same thing. They grow, they infiltrate, and they dominate. And they wanted to give us something that would be different. And they worked hard at it. And they almost dissolved the conference because they had so many different ideals and so much controversy. An 81-year-old Benjamin Franklin got up in front of the assembly and he said, "Stop, gentlemen. Let's get down on our knees and let's seek wisdom from the Lord." And they knelt and prayed, and they got up and they put together the Constitution of the United States of America, which I believe is a God-inspired document. But Franklin was asked the right question when he came out of that building. A woman said, "Sir, what do we have here? A monarchy or a republic?" And he famously said, "A republic if you can keep it." We're as close to losing it right now as we have ever been. And it's going to be up to us to keep it. They recognize that our government, like all other governments, would move in a direction of domination and control. But they created a safety valve. And that safety valve is we the people with our vote. Do you realize, particularly in the Christian evangelical arena, we have millions of people who don't vote? They don't want to be involved in a corrupt system. They say, "I don't want to be in a position of having to choose between the lesser of two evils." Well, unless Jesus Christ is one of the candidates, you're always selecting between the lesser of two evils. And isn't that the reason that he gave us a brain? So that we could evaluate side by side the different people, see which ones correspond to our belief systems. And think about our founding document, the Declaration of Independence. What does it say? It says our rights come from our Creator, a.k.a. God. That made us a very special nation in the very beginning. And think about some of those rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When you're using that vote, all you have to do is compare the two sides. Which side is for life? And you know, the pro-life people have to stop fighting amongst themselves because, you know, we have some, like myself, who believe that life begins at conception. Then there are those who believe that it starts at 6 weeks when there's a heartbeat. There are those who believe it starts at 15 weeks when there's sensation. Well, the fact of the matter is they're all under the pro-life umbrella, and they need to stop fighting each other and recognize that we're making progress toward having a society that honors life that is given by God. Now, we need to be vocal in our support for life. We need to point out inconsistencies. For instance, have you noticed that if someone murders a pregnant woman, they get charged with 2 counts of murder? And yet, if you just murdered the baby, you're upholding women's rights. You know, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So, you know, I think we should be gentle, but point out some of these inconsistencies. I think it's also very important that we recognize that we're in a time that's a little strange in our society right now. And, you know, we've kind of thrown out a lot of our morals and a lot of our values. You know, there's one really good way to make sure that we don't have unwanted babies. But people don't know this word anymore. It's called abstinence. You know? And when you turn your television on, do you see any avocation of abstinence? None whatsoever. The heroes in the movies are the ones who jump from bed to bed, you know, are very virile, very sexy. This is what our children are growing up with. This is what they're seeing. And you couple that with the fact that family formation is lagging behind. We only have 23.1 million traditional nuclear families left. That's where the values get passed down from one generation to another. And a lot of people are now getting their values from social media, from TikTok, from their friends, and not through a traditional family. And we have a lot of young people who are not even getting married and not even thinking about getting married. Those of us who've been married for a long time have to be missionaries. We have to tell them it's okay to be married. And, you know, when you take 2 people from different environments, you put them together under the same roof, there's going to be some friction. You know, it's sort of like rubbing 2 pieces of sandpaper together. But if you keep rubbing them, what happens? It becomes smooth. You got to stay in there long enough for it to become smooth. And that's what we need to help people to understand. God had a plan. But the other side, they don't want you to talk about these things. They don't want you to shine the light on the things that they're doing to destroy our families in America. And why are they so intent on doing that? Because we are a very strong nation, and we can't be brought down in any other way. And they need to bring us down in order to implement the one world government. But we stand in the way of that. They can't defeat us militarily. So how would you defeat us? Internally, from within. Destroy our foundational building block, which are our families. And if you think this is just wild fantasy, go back and look at the congressional record, January the 10th, 1963, when Congressman Herlong of Florida read into the record the 45 goals of communism in America, how to fundamentally change our nation. Things like gaining control of the public schools and the teacher unions so that you can indoctrinate the kids. The Marxists understand the importance of that. And the Bible understood the importance of that. In Proverbs 22:6, it says, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he'll not depart from it. Well, they understand that too, which is why Lenin said, give me your children to teach for 4 years, and the seed that I sow will never be uprooted. One of the other goals, gain control of the news media. and of Hollywood so that you could manipulate the culture, change the cultural norms in the family. Another one of the goals, decrease the importance and the significance of the family. Drive wedges between parents and children. Think about that. Make sexual perversion normal, natural, and healthy. All of these things undermine the moral fabric of a society. And you see things are changing very, very rapidly in our society. We have to fight against it. And we have to be bold. You know, the left counts on intimidation and fear. They want to keep you silent. They don't care what you think as long as you keep your mouth shut, as long as you don't do anything about it. It's a very effective tool. And fear, look what it does to you. You know, I remember when I was a youngster, I was deathly afraid of dogs. In fact, I would be late to school a lot of times because I'd almost be there, and then there'd be a dog. And I had to go all the way around the block and come that other way. And then there'd be another dog. And then, you know, the teachers got tired of my excuses. But then there was a man, and he said, Benny, dogs will not bother you if you're not afraid of them. Or at least if you act like you're not afraid of them. And he said, it can be the most ferocious dog. Just ignore them. They won't bother you. I said, are you sure about this? Yeah. He said, absolutely. So I said, I'm going to test this out because there was this mean dog on our street and nobody wanted to go down in that area. I said, I'm going to go down there where Rusty is. So I go strolling down there and Rusty sees me. His ears perk up. He starts licking his chops. And he comes charging at me, barking and snarling, runs right up to me, and I said, this was a mistake. But he just sniffs my leg and then turns around and goes back to the porch. You know, from that day forward, Rusty never bothered me. Other people he would try to intimidate, but when I walked by, he just stayed on the porch and didn't bother me. And that's the way it is with those who are trying to intimidate us. We just have to not be fearful. And that lack of fear had a lot to do with the career that I had. I prayed a lot. I asked God for wisdom. But when I felt he wanted me to do something, I always felt that he would provide the mechanism to do it. I remember there was a young man, and he had a disease called von Hippel-Lindau, where you develop all these vascular tumors in your central nervous system. And he developed one in his pons, in the brain stem, an inoperable area. And none of the adult neurosurgeons would operate on him. Unfortunately for me, his wife was a pediatric neurosurgery nurse who took care of my patients on the neurosurgery floor. And she said, you're going to have to operate on my husband. And I said, but I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. And she said, he acts like a child. So she kept pestering me, and finally I agreed to go talk to her husband. And I said, Craig, you know, this is a very dangerous area, and there's a reason that no one wants to operate on it. And if I operate on this, there's at least a 50% chance that you will die on the table. And he said, Doc, if you don't operate, there's a 100% chance I'm going to die. So what do you got to lose? So I took him to the operating room, a very vascular area. It had grown in new vessels to feed the tumor. But I cleared a small area of the brain stem under the microscope, put in a little micro probe where I thought the tumor should be, feeling for consistency change. I felt it, put in a little micro forceps and grabbed what I felt was the capsule and started delivering it. And just as it was appearing in the opening, the anesthesiologist said, "The evoked potentials are flat, the brain waves. You killed him. I told you were going to kill him," because he was very against the operation. There was a somber mood. I completed the resection. Of course, after the operation, he didn't wake up, had no significant function. But we prayed a lot. His wife and I prayed. I went home, and when I came back the next morning, he was sitting up in the bed telling jokes.